Good morning, children. Now let's start revision of your New Voices textbook. We have got two lessons. One is prose and the other is poetry. And listen, children, you are going to go through your lesson very, very carefully. Okay? Go through the videos that we have sent you and also the notes. But remember, they're only MCQs where you're just going to click on the right answer. So it's going to be quite easy for you. Okay, children? So let's begin here with the first lesson, My Lost Dollar. Now, this is by Stephen Leacock, and he was an internationally popular Canadian humorist, educator, lecturer, and author of more than 30 books of light-hearted sketches with criticisms of people's follies. The Stephen Leacock Memorial Medal for Humor was named in his honor. He is best remembered for his best-selling book, Sunshine Sketches of a Little Town. Now, children, whether it is prose or even poetry, it is always good to remember the author or even the poet or poetess. Here, the writer is Stephen Leacock. Now, this is a picture of the writer with his friend Todd. Okay, and he is lending $1 to his friend. Can you see that in the picture? Now, let's come to the summary. I think, children, you have already gone through this lesson. This was done in the month of May, children. But here, this is as a summary, just to refresh your memory. Okay, children? So, the narrator's close friend Todd is going on a holiday to Bermuda. Just before his departure, he wants some small change to pay off the taxi. He asks the narrator to lend him $1. So the narrator's close friend Todd is going on a holiday and he wants, some small change to pay off the taxi. And he asks the narrator, and the narrator happily lends him $1. The latter gives it readily. Todd departs for Bermuda. Todd writes a letter to the narrator from Bermuda, but is not bothered to return the $1 to the narrator. Okay, so Todd writes a letter to a narrator from Bermuda. Okay, so from Bermuda, Todd is writing a letter to the narrator. But there's no dollar bill inside the envelope. Okay, he has written a letter, but inside the envelope, there is no dollar. 12 months go by. Todd is returned from Bermuda. So after 12 months, his friend returns from Bermuda, but is not bothered to return the $1 to the narrator. So he just didn't bother to return the dollar. The narrator is decent enough not to offend his friend by demanding his dollar back. Okay, like all good friends, the narrator also seems to be quite a decent fellow. Okay, and he didn't want to, offend his friend. Okay, by asking him to return his money, that is his dollar. He tries many ways to remind Todd about the dollar he owed. Okay, so there are many a time the narrator tried to remind Todd about the dollar, okay, which he had lent him, but due to some incomprehensible reasons, okay, so something there were many, he was not able to just comprehend what the reasons were. The memory of the unpaid dollar refuses to enter Todd's mind. So, whatever could be the reason, the author is just not able to comprehend the idea of paying back never entered Todd's mind. The narrator lists out the ways he attempted to remind his friend. So, there many a time the narrator, tried many attempts to remind his friend to return the dollar. First, he went to the railway station to receive Todd when he returned from Bermuda. So, the first time he went to the railway station to receive his friend when he returned from Bermuda. Todd was as cheerful as ever, but not the least embarrassed. Is it not, children, when you have to return something to someone and if you're not able to, when you see your friend, you're going to be embarrassed. Is it not? But here, Todd was least embarrassed. He was as jolly and as cheerful as ever. The narrator's agony mounts. So, the seeing Todd to be as happy as ever, least bothered about returning, the, agony of narrator increases. On another occasion, during an evening chat, the narrator broaches the subject. On another occasion, when they were sitting, on an evening chat, when they're busy chatting during an evening, again the narrator tried to bring out the subject of you know, the dollar, okay, of the American dollar by asking if it is in circulation in Bermuda too. So he tried to broach the subject, that is, bring out the subject of the American dollar so that the his friend will try to remember and return. And what did he ask? He asked him if the dollar was in circulation in Bermuda too. Todd replies, but the suggestion fails to kindle his memory about the unpaid dollar. He, of course, he replied, but somehow the memory of the unpaid dollar just skipped his mind. The narrator meets Todd almost every day in the club, but Todd never mentions about his debt. Okay, so every day both meet at the club, but Todd never ever mentioned about the debt that he had to pay the narrator. Todd even says that he no longer remembers much about his Bermuda trip. So even Todd even said that he doesn't even remember about the trip that he made to Bermuda. The narrator is exasperated. He feels resigned to the loss of his dollar. Okay, so the narrator gets very, very irritated. He feels okay. He feels that he's after all going to lose the dollar that he had lent to his friend. In desperation, he writes off the dollar. So it was with utmost desperation that he just, lets off. Okay, if he's going to lose the dollar, well, let it be. He just writes it off. He adds Toad's name to his list of people who have similarly defaulted in repaying their $1 loans. Okay, so to the list of all the people who had defaulted in paying him their $1 loans, the narrator also adds Toad's name. The narrator remains as friendly with Todd as before. Okay, so this is quite unlike any of us, is it not? So here the narrator is a very good man. Okay, so even if Todd hasn't been able to return the dollar, the narrator was as friendly with him as before. On another occasion, okay, sorry, on another day, the narrator met Todd over dinner. Todd mentioned disapprovingly how Poland had defaulted in its debts. Okay, so on another occasion, the narrator again met Todd over dinner and he again, okay, Todd again brought out the subject of Poland and how Poland had defaulted in its debts. To the narrator's distress, Todd did not appear to think of his own unpaid debt. So Much to the narrator's distress, even though Todd talked about, debt of Poland, he simply did not think of his own unpaid debt to the narrator. With his wounded feelings, the narrator begins a period of introspection. Yes, the writer was very, very wounded. Is it not? He was still thinking of his dollar. He wanted his friend to return it to him, but then there was no question of his friend returning it. So that actually set the narrator to think. Okay, the narrative begins a period of introspection. He feels if forgetting loans is so human, he himself could have taken such loans and not repaid it. Okay, so he began to think if forgetting loans is so human, that is, if it is so human to forget loans, he himself would have taken loans from so many people and not repaid it. This realization unsettles him. Is actually, the very thought of this not repaying actually quite unsettles him. Okay, he began to think about it. The feeling of moral guilt haunts the narrator. So he became very, very guilty. Okay, that started to haunt him. Okay, the very feeling that he could also have taken loans from other people and not repaid it actually begins to haunt the narrator. He wants his creditors to come forward and claim their funds. So he actually, started thinking he wanted his creditors to come forward and claim their funds. He wanted his creditors to come and ask him for the money that he owes them. So disturbed the narrator is about this discontent of loan defaults that he wants to start a back to honesty campaign. So thinking about all this, the narrator was very, very disturbed and he wanted to start a back to honesty campaign. He's convinced that honesty should be the base of all nations aspiring to greatness. So he's of the opinion that honesty should be the base, should be the foundation of all nations who aspire, who desire to be great. While concluding, the narrator wants his forgetful friend Todd not to know of the torment the non payment has caused to him. So, towards the concluding part, the narrator warns his friend. Okay, so he doesn't want his friend to know that that $1 had tormented him. Okay, the non-payment of that $1 had tormented the narrator for such a long time. Thus, he doesn't want his friend to know. Comically, he warns the readers not to bring the copies of the story to the University Club Montreal, frequented by Major Todd. At the same time, okay, he also warns, warns the readers as such that they he doesn't want the readers to bring copies of the story, okay, to the University Club of Montreal. So this University Club of Montreal is frequented by Major Todd. Okay, children, so with this you might have got an idea. Okay, for those who have already forgotten what the story is about, you all might have got an idea of what the story is about. Okay, so children, we will have a comprehension passage here and you'll get to know the type of questions that you'll be having for your unit test. Okay, so here I've taken this passage. Let's go through this. If they are such men, I want them to speak out, not all at once, but in reasonable numbers. and as far as may be in alphabetical order. I will immediately write their names down on paper. I don't count here men who may have lent me an odd dollar over a bridge table, and I'm not thinking, indeed, I'm taking care not to think of the man who lent me 30 cents to pay for a bottle of plain soda in the Detroit Athletic Club last month. I always find that there is nothing like plain soda after a tiring ride across the Canadian frontier. And that man who advanced the 30 cents knows exactly why I felt that I had done enough for him. But for any man ever lent me a dollar to pay for a taxi when I was starting for Bermuda, I want to pay it. Okay? Next is more than that. I want to start a general movement, a back to honesty movement for paying all these odd dollars that are borrowed in moments of expansion. Let us remember that the greatest nations were built up on the rock basis of absolute honesty. So this is a passage for you children, and let's go into the question answers here. Okay, so your passage is if they are such men to absolute honesty. So the first question is why did the man lend the author Stephen Leacock 30 cents? Let's go back to the passage, children. So can you see here? And I'm not thinking, indeed, I'm not taking care not to, of the man who lent me 30 cents to pay for a bottle of plain soda. Okay? So, look at the choice here. You've got three alternatives. Here, the first one is to pay for a bottle of plain soda, to pay for the taxi ride to go to Bermuda. So the man lent the author Stephen Leacock 30 cents to pay for a bottle of plain soda. So which is the correct answer? It is A. So you click on A. Is that clear, children? Next one. Second one. How is the ride across the Canadian frontier? Okay, let's go back. Look at this. Here you have the answer. I always find that there is nothing like plain soda after a tiring ride across the Canadian frontier. Okay? So your answer is the ride across the Canadian frontier is exciting, tiring, boring. So is the answer, children? Your answer is the ride across the Canadian frontier is tiring. So click on B, that is tiring. Okay? Third one. Why does the author, Stephen Leacock, want to start a back to honesty movement? Okay, so you've got the answer here. More than that, I want to start a general movement, a back to honesty movement for paying all these odd dollars that are borrowed in moments of expansion. Okay, so, okay, let's see the answer now. The author Stephen Leacock wants to start a back to honesty movement to pay all the odd dollars that were borrowed, to have a bottle of plain soda with his friends, to borrow a dollar to pay for a taxi. So children, which is the answer? It is A, to pay all the odd dollars that were borrowed. So click on A. Is that clear, children? Next one. Look at the fourth. The greatest nations were built on rock bases of absolute dishonesty. Okay, let's go back and see. Okay, look at the last line. Let us remember that the greatest nations were built up on the rock basis of absolute honesty. Okay? So, what's the question? The greatest nations were built on the rock basis of absolute dishonesty. The first one is agree, the second is disagree. So, what's the answer, children? It is disagree. So, okay, click on B. Is that clear? Now, next one, fifth. If they are such men, I want them to speak out. Who does I refer to? So, who does I refer to? Is it Todd or is it the author? Yes, children, it is the author. So, click on B. So, children, I think you've now understood the type of questions that you can have for your unit test. You don't have to worry, nothing to write on. You just have to click on the right answer. Is that clear, children? So, do your test well. Best of luck. Thank you, children.